A terminally ill elderly woman receives a mysterious letter from Pope Francis, and tears of emotion roll down her wrinkled face. A sacred message transforms not just her life, but an entire community parched by drought. Amidst inexplicable miracles and spiritual revelations, discover how divine words can blossom even in the most arid soil. A journey of faith, hope, and renewal that will touch your soul. Subscribe, leave a like, and comment where you're watching this extraordinary story from. The sun beat down relentlessly on the cracked earth of Dry Rock, a small town in the rural Midwest where it hadn't rained for 3 years. In that vast expanse of ochre and gray, the adobe houses seemed to surrender to the climate's hostility, shrinking under a sky so intensely blue it was almost white. In the parched backyard of the last house on the main street, an old olive tree, brought from Europe decades before, stood like a miracle, or perhaps a challenge to the fate that had condemned the region. It was under the sparse shade of this tree that Mrs. Eleanor used to sit every afternoon. But today, her small wooden stool rested empty. At 78 years old, her body consumed by work and an illness that doctors in New York City had sentenced as terminal, Eleanor was now confined to the bed in the small back room of the house. Eleanor's hands told stories. Every wrinkle, every callus, every spot was a chapter of a life dedicated to the land. These same hands now rested on the white sheet, still as exhausted birds after a long migration. Her eyes, once alive like two black glass beads, had lost their sparkle, becoming opaque like the sky before the storm that never came. 6 months, the doctor from New York City had said, with the coldness of someone accustomed to delivering death sentences. 6 months was all she had left in this world. Eleanor accepted the verdict with the same resignation with which she accepted the droughts, as part of a divine plan she dared not question. On that Thursday morning, the usual silence of the house was interrupted by knocks on the door. Lucy, the only neighbor who still visited Eleanor daily, left the wooden spoon in the pot where she was preparing broth and went to answer. "Good morning, peace be with you," said a young man, wearing a black cassock that seemed to absorb all the heat of the rural Midwest. "What do you wish, Father?" asked Lucy, wiping her hands on her flowered apron. "I'm looking for the residence of Eleanor Smith. That's here, but she's bedridden, barely receives visitors." The priest adjusted his thin-rimmed glasses on his nose and took an envelope from the inner pocket of his cassock. "I have something important to deliver to her. It's personal." There was something in the rigid posture of that man that contrasted with the warm informality of the local people. Father Michael had arrived at the parish only 3 weeks before, coming from Chicago, and had not yet adapted to the local customs, the heat, the dust, or the almost folk faith of those people who mixed Catholicism with ancestral superstitions. Lucy hesitated for a moment, but ended up leading the priest down the narrow hallway to the room where Eleanor rested. The light entering through the small window illuminated the elderly woman's wrinkled face as if it were a map carved by time. Each line, a road traveled. Each mark, a story lived. "Mrs. Eleanor, the new priest has come to visit you," Lucy announced. The elderly woman slowly opened her eyes, those eyes that in other times predicted rains and droughts with a precision that confused even meteorologists. Eyes that the inhabitants of Dry Rock had learned to consult before planting or harvesting. "Priest?" Her voice was just a hoarse whisper. "I am Father Michael, Mrs. Eleanor. I have been assigned to the parish of Our Lady of Guadalupe. I brought something for you." He extended the white envelope, where an official Vatican seal shone in the sunlight entering through the window. Eleanor's eyes, blurred by illness, widened, trying to focus her vision on the object the priest held. "What is this, Father?" "A letter. A letter from Pope Francis for you." Lucy let out an exclamation of surprise. Eleanor, with trembling hands, tried to sit up in bed. The neighbor rushed to help her, arranging pillows behind her back. "From the Pope? For me? There must be some mistake." Father Michael shook his head negatively. "There is no mistake. This letter arrived at the Vatican addressed to the parish, with specific instructions to be delivered by hand to you." Eleanor took the envelope, with reverence, like someone holding a sacred relic. Her gnarled fingers caressed the thin paper, pausing at the official seal. A single tear rolled down her wrinkled face. "Do you know what the letter says, Father?" "No, Mrs. Eleanor. It is for you and only for you." Father Michael quickly withdrew, as if merely fulfilling a bureaucratic obligation. He did not notice, or pretended not to notice, that he was leaving behind a mystery that would soon transform that small community. When the door closed, Eleanor looked at Lucy with an intensity the neighbor hadn't seen in months. "I need to be alone, my dear." "But Mrs. Eleanor, please, just for a little while." Reluctantly, Lucy left the room, closing the door. In the hallway, she pressed her ear to the wood, but all she could hear was the sound of paper being carefully opened. Inside the room, Eleanor unfolded the letter with trembling fingers. The light entering through the window formed a golden rectangle over the paper, as if the sun itself wanted to read those words. As her eyes scanned the lines, something extraordinary happened. The sparkle returned to them, a sparkle that Lucy, peeking through the crack in the door, witnessed with astonishment. No one knew that day the exact contents of the letter. Eleanor kept it under her pillow and refused to talk about the matter. But a subtle transformation began to work within her. The next morning, to everyone's surprise, she asked to be taken to the small backyard, where her garden, previously parched by the drought, had been dying for months. "Leave me here for a while," she asked Tony, her nephew who had come to help carry her. "But Auntie, the sun is too strong." "The sun has always been strong, my boy. And yet, here we are." Eleanor, sitting in her rocking chair, spent hours observing the dry ground, murmuring incomprehensible words as if talking to the earth. Her lips moved in a silent prayer, while her fingers ran over an old wooden rosary. The next day, inexplicably, small green shoots began to emerge where only cracked earth had been before. At first, no one paid attention. Lemongrass had always been resilient, they said. But when within a week Mrs. Eleanor's entire garden began to flourish, the residents of Dry Rock could not ignore the fact. "It's a miracle," whispered Mrs. Antonia, the folk healer of the village, upon seeing a collard green plant with leaves so green they looked like satin. "It's the Pope's letter," stated Mr. Manuel, who had never set foot in a church, but now made the sign of the cross when passing in front of Eleanor's house. Visits soon began. First, it was just the closest neighbors, curious to see the garden flourishing in the middle of the drought. Then came people from neighboring communities, bringing bottles to take some water from Eleanor's well, which surprisingly remained full while all the others in the region dried up. "Mrs. Eleanor, you must tell us what the letter said," visitors insisted. But she only smiled, that enigmatic smile of someone guarding a secret too precious to be shared. Her eyes now shone with renewed vitality, as if the very light of hope had found a home in them. The phenomenon soon attracted the attention of the regional church authorities. The bishop of the diocese sent an investigator, an elderly and skeptical priest, accustomed to unmasking false miracles. Father Anselm arrived on a scorching afternoon, with his notebook and stern expression. "So this is where the miracles happen?" he asked with thinly veiled irony. Eleanor received him sitting under the olive tree, which now displayed greener and more vigorous leaves than ever. "Miracles happen everywhere, Father. You just need to have eyes to see." Father Anselm spent 3 days in Dry Rock. He examined the garden, interviewed the neighbors, analyzed the well water. On the morning of the 4th day, he left without saying goodbye, leaving behind only a laconic report for the bishop. "Inexplicable phenomenon. Recommend continued observation." While the religious authorities debated, the news spread. A month after the letter arrived, a national TV crew parked its van in the central square of Dry Rock. The town, which had been forgotten on the map, suddenly became the center of attention. "We are here in Dry Rock, where a 78-year-old woman, diagnosed with a terminal illness, received a mysterious letter from Pope Francis. And since then, inexplicable phenomena have been occurring," announced the reporter, with Eleanor's flourishing backyard in the background. It was this report that brought Helen back to Dry Rock. Eleanor's granddaughter, Helen, had left the town 10 years before to study agronomy in New York City. She had broken with traditions, with the church, and almost broken with her grandmother when she announced she wouldn't return to that God-forsaken place. The bus that brought her back stopped at the improvised bus stop, raising a cloud of red dust. Helen stepped down carrying a heavy backpack and the even heavier weight of someone returning to face the past. Her hair, now cut short and dyed red, drew as much attention as her urban attire and her determined way of walking. "Has my grandmother become a tourist attraction now?" she asked bitterly upon seeing the commotion in front of the family home. Helen found Eleanor in the backyard, surrounded by a group of women collecting medicinal herbs. Her grandmother's transformation took her by surprise. Where she expected to find an elderly woman on the verge of death, she saw a woman who was fragile, yes, but with an energy that radiated from her eyes like sunbeams. "Grandma." Eleanor looked up, and for an instant, everything around seemed to disappear. Time froze in that reunion. "My girl has come back," she simply said, opening her arms. The embrace was long and silent, filled with everything that had been left unsaid in years of absence. When they finally separated, Helen wiped away tears she hadn't even realized she was shedding. "I came to get you out of here. It's turning into a circus." Eleanor smiled, in that way she had of smiling more with her eyes than with her lips. "There's nowhere to go, my dear. This is where I must be." "But Grandma, they're exploiting you. This story about the Pope's letter, you know it's probably a fraud, don't you?" Eleanor didn't respond immediately. Her gaze wandered over the flourishing backyard, the people talking in the shade of the olive tree, the earth that, against all odds, continued to produce. "There are many kinds of truth in the world, Helen. Yours is in books, in laboratories. Mine is here." She touched her chest. "And here," she pointed to the earth beneath her feet. Against her will, but unable to argue against her grandmother's serenity, Helen decided to stay. "Just until this madness is over," she told herself. In the room that had been hers in childhood, she opened her backpack and organized her belongings. Agronomy books, a laptop, soil analysis equipment. She was determined to find a scientific explanation for what was happening on her grandmother's property. In the days that followed, Helen divided her time between caring for Eleanor and conducting tests on the soil, water, and plants. At night, she pored over her laptop, comparing data, researching. Her presence created a division in the town. On one side, those who saw the phenomena as a divine miracle. On the other, those who began to believe in the scientific explanations of the doctor from New York City, as they started calling her. The young Father Michael observed this division with growing interest. Something about Helen intrigued and disturbed him. Perhaps it was her declared skepticism, so similar to the one he himself hid beneath his cassock. Or perhaps it was simply the way she questioned everything, including his authority as a representative of the church. "You shouldn't encourage these people's superstition," he said to Eleanor one afternoon. "And you shouldn't underestimate their faith, Father," the elderly woman replied with a wisdom that disconcerted him. Time passed, and Eleanor's condition, which according to doctors should have worsened rapidly, remained stable. More than that, there were days when she seemed to rejuvenate, as if each sprout that emerged in her garden returned a little of her lost vitality. The third month after the letter arrived coincided with the 4th of July celebration, the biggest celebration of the regional culture. That year, however, the celebration took on special significance in Dry Rock. Eleanor, who rarely left the house, announced that she would participate in the procession and that she had something important to share with the community. The news spread like wildfire. On the night of the celebration, the central square was more crowded than ever. Colorful flags fluttered in the warm breeze, bonfires illuminated expectant faces, the aroma of traditional foods permeated the air. Eleanor arrived supported by Helen and Lucy, wearing a sky-blue dress she had saved for years for special occasions. When she approached the bandstand, a respectful silence fell over the crowd. Even the children stopped running and playing, as if they understood the solemnity of the moment. "My dears," Eleanor began, her voice surprisingly firm for someone so physically frail. "3 months ago, I received a message that changed my life. Many of you have asked about the contents of the letter that Pope Francis sent me. Today, I want to share part of that message with you. A murmur of excitement ran through the crowd. Helen, beside her grandmother, frowned, worried about the turn things were taking. The Holy Father, Eleanor continued, asked me to lead a special novena. A novena that combines our traditional Catholic prayers with the knowledge our ancestors left us about how to care for the land. Father Michael, who was observing everything from a corner of the square, straightened up, suddenly attentive. That was not in any church protocol he knew. For 9 days, Eleanor proceeded, we will pray at sunset, not just with words, but with actions. Each day we will plant a different species using the techniques our grandparents taught us. Each day we will share knowledge that has been passed down from generation to generation, but which we are forgetting. Eleanor's proposal caused diverse reactions. Many applauded enthusiastically, seeing in it hope for reversing the devastating drought. Others, more conservative, looked hesitantly at the priest, seeking approval. Father Michael felt the weight of those gazes. His duty would be to condemn that mixture of Catholicism with practices that bordered on paganism, but something in Eleanor's dignity, in the genuine faith of those people, touched a part of him that had long remained dormant. The Church, he said, taking a step forward, has always valued popular wisdom and the care of God's creation. If Mrs. Eleanor received guidance from the Holy Father for this novena, who am I to question? His words were met with warm applause. Helen, however, did not share the general enthusiasm. After the ceremony, she confronted her grandmother on the way back home. Do you really believe the Pope wrote personally that he knows you exist? Eleanor smiled enigmatically. God knows I exist, my dear. That is enough for me. The novena began the next day. Each sunset, dozens of people gathered in Eleanor's backyard, bringing seeds, seedlings, tools. After the traditional prayers, the elderly woman shared ancestral knowledge about planting, water conservation, weather prediction through observing nature. When ants march in a line carrying leaves back to the anthill, it's a sign that it will rain, she taught. Our ancestors knew how to read the signs of the earth. We need to relearn that language. Helen observed everything with a mix of skepticism and fascination. As a scientist, she rejected mysticism. As a granddaughter, she could not deny her grandmother's visible transformation, whose health improved daily, defying medical prognoses. On the 4th day of the novena, while planting a drought-resistant variety of beans, Helen noticed something strange about the soil's behavior. Grandma, the earth here is different. Eleanor nodded as if she already knew. It's the hidden river, my dear. Hidden river. The river that runs beneath the earth. My father spoke of it, and his father before him. We always knew it was here, waiting to be found. Helen frowned, her scientific mind working quickly. Are you talking about an aquifer? Eleanor shrugged. Call it what you will, my dear. For us, it has always been the hidden river. Intrigued, Helen spent the following days conducting tests on the soil. To her surprise, the analyses confirmed the presence of a large reserve of underground water, an aquifer that could supply the entire region if properly exploited. The discovery of the aquifer transformed the novena into an even more significant event. Now, it wasn't just faith that united those people, but a concrete hope for transformation for the drought-stricken region. On the 8th day of the novena, when the news had already spread beyond the borders of Dry Rock, a delegation of engineers from the state government arrived in the town. Among them was Charles Miller, a representative of a large bottled water company, interested in the commercial potential of the aquifer. Mrs. Eleanor, he said after the preliminary studies, this water is exceptionally pure. My company would be interested in buying your property for a considerable sum. The businessman's eyes gleamed with the prospect of profit. Eleanor's eyes, however, remained serene, fixed on something only she seemed to see. And what would happen to the town? Young man, the question caught Charles by surprise. Well, we would create jobs, of course, but commercial extraction would require exclusive use of the aquifer. Then the answer is no, Eleanor interrupted, with a firmness that allowed no dispute. "This water is not mine to sell. It is a gift for everyone." The businessman did not give up easily. In the days that followed, he returned with increasingly tempting offers, including the promise of advanced medical treatments that could prolong Eleanor's life. "Think carefully, Mrs. Eleanor," he insisted. "With this money, you could seek treatment. The best hospitals in the country. Live longer, see your grandchildren grow up." For a brief moment, temptation flickered in the elderly woman's eyes. What would it be like to see Helen start a family, have great-grandchildren, live a few more years? But then, her gaze swept over the flourishing backyard, the people working together on the formerly barren land, the community revitalizing around, the miracle. "There are more important things than prolonging one's own life, young man," she finally replied, "like ensuring that life continues after us." On the 9th and final day of the novena, a crowd gathered in Eleanor's backyard. People from all the neighboring towns, journalists, curious onlookers, everyone wanted to witness the conclusion of that extraordinary event. Father Michael, who over those days had transformed from a skeptical observer into an enthusiastic participant, led the final prayers. His face, once always tense and closed, now broke into frequent smiles. The cassock, which in the first weeks seemed to suffocate him, now rested naturally on his shoulders, like a second skin. "Brothers and sisters," he said, "we witness here a true miracle. Not just the miracle of water springing from the arid soil, but the miracle of community united around a common purpose." As he spoke, Helen approached Eleanor, holding a paper in her hands. "Grandma, I need to show you something." Carefully, she handed her grandmother the results of the latest soil and water analyses. "The rain is coming back, Grandma. All the signs are here, the drought cycle is ending." Eleanor smiled without surprise. "I know, my dear. I've felt it in my bones for weeks." The closing ceremony of the novena was marked by singing, prayers, and the communal planting of a young olive tree, a descendant of the one Eleanor had brought decades before. When the last hymn ended, Father Michael asked for a moment for a special announcement. "Mrs. Eleanor, there is something I need to confess." A tense silence fell over the crowd. The young priest took a deep breath, like someone preparing for a dive into unknown waters. "The letter I delivered to you, it did not come directly from Pope Francis." Murmurs of astonishment swept through the crowd. Helen took a step forward, instinctively protective. "Before becoming a priest," Michael continued, "I worked for a brief period at the Vatican as a translator. I knew the forms, the seals, the way to draft official documents. When I arrived at this parish and learned of your condition, Mrs. Eleanor, of the drought that plagued the region, of the loss of hope, something in me stirred. I wrote that letter, hoping to bring you a little comfort in your final days. I never imagined." His voice broke. Tears flowed freely down his face. Helen looked at her grandmother, expecting to see disappointment, perhaps anger. Instead, she found only serenity. "I always knew, my son," Eleanor said softly, "from the very first moment." It was Michael's turn to be surprised. "You knew, but then why? Sometimes we need to believe in something greater than ourselves to find the strength to carry on. You gave me that opportunity, Father, and through me, you gave it to this community." At that moment, as if to confirm her words, a murmur spread through the crowd. Someone was pointing to the sky. On the horizon, dark clouds were forming, the first in 3 years. "It's rain!" shouted a child, with the spontaneity only the young possess. The emotion was contagious. People embraced, cried, laughed. Helen looked at the sky with the eyes of a scientist finally confirming a hypothesis, but also with the eyes of the girl who once believed her grandmother's stories about the hidden river. As the first drop of rain fell, moistening the thirsty earth, something unexpected happened. An official car parked at the entrance to the property. From it stepped a man of solemn appearance, wearing the characteristic attire of papal emissaries. "I am looking for Eleanor Smith," he announced in heavily accented English. Surprised, Father Michael led the visitor to where Eleanor was sitting, now protected from the rain which was beginning to fall by a colorful umbrella someone had lent her. "Mrs. Eleanor," said the emissary, making a slight bow, I bring a message from His Holiness Pope Francis." With hands trembling with emotion, he handed her an envelope very similar to the one Michael had forged months before. The difference was that this one was genuine. How did the Holy Father know?" Father Michael stammered, astonished. The emissary smiled. "Reports about the events here reached Rome. His Holiness was particularly touched by the story of the novena that combined prayers with traditional knowledge of land preservation, something very much aligned with his encyclical Laudato Si on the care for our common home." Eleanor opened the envelope with the same reverence with which she had opened the first. The rain was now falling more intensely, but no one seemed willing to leave the spot. Everyone watched in respectful silence as she read the papal message. A smile of deep peace lit up her face. "The Holy Father," she finally said, "blesses our initiative and asks us to continue the work of caring for the earth as guardians of God's creation." The rain had now turned into a true storm, one of those that the rural Midwest receives once or twice a year, if at all. People ran for shelter. Children danced in the puddles that were starting to form. Farmers raised their arms to the sky in gratitude. In the midst of that spontaneous celebration, Helen approached her grandmother, who remained seated under her colorful umbrella, watching everything with shining eyes. "And now, Grandma, are you going to tell us what the first letter really said?" Eleanor smiled in that enigmatic way that had always intrigued her granddaughter. "That letter said exactly what I needed to hear at that moment, my dear, and what this community needed to believe. But it wasn't real." "What is real, Helen?" Eleanor's voice was soft, almost lost in the sound of the rain. "The letter wasn't authentic, but the faith it awakened was true. The aquifer we found was always here, waiting to be discovered. The knowledge of our ancestors about the earth was always real, even when modern science ignored it. And look around." She made a broad gesture, encompassing the people celebrating in the rain. "This community, united, working together. Isn't that real?" Helen didn't answer immediately. Her eyes swept over the backyard, now transformed into a small pond, and rested on the figure of Father Michael, who was talking animatedly with the papal emissary under an improvised awning. She saw the young priest who had arrived just a few months ago, rigid and distrustful, now fully integrated into the community, transformed by the very pious lie he had told. "I think I understand what you mean, Grandma." Eleanor nodded, satisfied. "The true divine intervention, my dear, was not in the letter. It was in our capacity to believe in something greater, to unite, to rediscover ancient knowledge and combine it with the new. It was in the reconciliation between faith and reason, tradition and progress. It was in you, returning to your roots, and in Father Michael, finding true faith beyond formalities." The rain was now lessening, turning into a fine, steady drizzle, exactly the kind of rain the parched earth needed to absorb the water without erosion. In the sky, a rainbow began to form, uniting the sky and the earth in a colorful embrace. Eleanor lifted her face to feel the raindrops, allowing them to wash the deep wrinkles that marked her skin like the cracks that, moments before, had marked the earth. "The doctor said I only had 6 months to live," she murmured. 6 months have passed since that diagnosis." Helen held her grandmother's hand tightly. "And you seem stronger every day." "Because I found a purpose, my dear. Something greater than my own suffering." At that moment, as if to confirm her words, a technician from the government team approached carrying a folder with documents. "Mrs. Eleanor, Helen," he greeted them. "I want to show you something." He opened the folder, protecting the papers from the drizzle that was still falling. "We've reviewed all the aquifer analyses. With your refusal to sell the property for commercial exploitation, we needed to find an alternative that would benefit the entire community." He showed a detailed project for the sustainable use of the water, with irrigation techniques that combined modern methods with traditional conservation practices. "This cooperative model you implemented during the novena, it's extraordinary. We are proposing to expand it to the entire region, transforming dry rock into a model of sustainable development for the semi-arid area." Helen examined the documents with a technical eye, impressed by the integration between scientific knowledge, and traditional wisdom. Without realizing it, she was doing exactly what she had come to prevent, legitimizing her grandmother's superstition with her academic knowledge. "It's an excellent project," she finally admitted. "I could contribute with some suggestions." While Helen and the technician discussed project details, Eleanor watched with a serene smile. Her gaze lifted to the horizon, where the clouds were beginning to dissipate, revealing a sky of intense blue, washed clean by the rain. New life sprouted from the ravaged earth, just as it had sprouted in her own heart. The letter that never existed, but which somehow became real, had been just the beginning of a much larger story. A story of renewal, of reconnection with deep roots, of reconciliation between seemingly opposing worlds. In the small-town church, the bells began to ring, calling for a special Thanksgiving Mass. People headed there, drenched but happy, carrying with them the certainty that a new era was beginning for Dry Rock. Eleanor refused help to go to church. "Don't worry, I'll stay here a little longer talking to the earth." When everyone had left, she closed her eyes and smelled the wet earth, the sweetest perfume she knew. Beneath her feet, she knew, ran the hidden river, finally revealed. In her heart, another river flowed, the river of faith that had never dried up even in the most arid times. You who now know this story may wonder, what was the true miracle in Dry Rock? The letter that never came, but then came. The water that was always there, waiting to be found, or the human capacity to transform hope into reality. Perhaps the true miracle is this, that in times of separation we can find paths of unity, that in times of disbelief we can rediscover faith, that in times of drought, literal or metaphorical, we can trust that beneath the arid surface hidden rivers run, waiting to fertilize the earth again. And you, what hidden river do you carry within you?